Over to you, Sue.
Welcome to tonight's special webinar on horseback adventures with World Expeditions. My name is Sue, and I'm really excited to be co-presenting this with my colleague today, which is Sarah Higgins. She's a fellow adventurer and horse lover. So late last year, we launched our first dedicated range of horse trek adventures, which was really a natural evolution of something we've been doing quietly and quite expertly, I would say, for decades. So over many years, we've long included like horseback elements into some of our expeditions. And for many travelers, those riding experiences have actually been a real highlight. So, drawing, I guess, on that success and the growing appetite for more sort of immersive journeys, what we've done is taken it a step further in curating this new portfolio of full horseback treks. These itineraries are really designed for travelers who want to experience the very wild and remote, areas of the world, but in a traditional way, with trusted local sort of steeds, and they're guided by horsemen and women whose lives are deeply connected to the land. In the destinations we've chosen for our horse treks, the bond between people and horses is not something that's learned. In fact, it's actually inherited, handed down from generation to generation, from the windswept sort of steppe of Mongolia to the high valleys of the Andes. Young children in these regions, they learn to ride before they walk often, and horsemanship is passed down as a heritage. So here, horses are not just a novelty, they are the family, they are the livelihood, and they are the pride of that community. Um, our horse treks are not just about riding. What we're trying to do with these is take travelers to enter a culture where the horse is central to the identity and to the movement and to life, actually, for that matter. So with this new range, our travelers are invited not simply to observe a way of life, but they're stepping into it physically, and to do that in a really respectful, slow way. And for most of our itineraries, they're suitable also for people who have little to no horse riding experience. So in this webinar, what we'll be doing is covering all of the nuances of what a horse trek involves. And that includes where our horse treks are offered. We'll be talking about what type of safety and support mechanisms are in place, what we're doing to look after our horses, and other things like the trip grading, the sort of gear and equipment that you can expect to need and what will be supplied, the 6 inaugural itineraries that are on offer. And at the very end, we'll be having a Q&A session. What I'd like to do now is just sort of hone in on what horse trekking is. And by definition, a horse trek is really just a small group adventure by horseback through wilderness landscapes. And what we hope to achieve with these is to offer travellers the chance to really experience life like herders and nomads. And that is more than often far from the beaten sort of path. So it's not about technical riding. These are slow journeys, and they're through culture and wilderness, and they're designed for people who are active travellers and who not necessarily are natural horse lovers. But of course, we all know that it's really easy to become very connected with your horse soon after you have arrived on one of these adventures. They are all led by local wranglers with ethical horse care and cultural insights, and they're fully supported, meaning that you have all your meals, accommodation, and camps and equipment provided. And as mentioned, little to no prior riding experience is needed. And I think what makes these really unique and different is that we're not selling just horse rides. Rather, what we're doing here is we are crafting responsible adventures where riding sort of supports a deeper cultural connection where roads really just do not go. So there are some really typical features to these itineraries. They've local horse breeds that are well adapted to the terrain. There's small group sizes, so typically from 6 to 12 people per trip. They're very scenic and beautiful locations, as you'll see later in the webinar. And you're staying in a variety of accommodations from camping, yurts, and homestays. Um, importantly as well, the selection of the horses and gear, and Sarah will talk to this a bit later, but the horses are locally bred and they're really specifically sort of chosen for their calm temperament, and they're experiencing sort of handling nervous or novice riders. And each traveller is sort of matched to a horse that is based on their size, their confidence, and their riding ability, or lack thereof, I should say, too. So saddles are very local style, but they are really well padded and designed for comfort over longer days. So where we'll be riding in our inaugural range, you've got the destinations of Mongolia, we've got Kyrgyzstan, Patagonia, two destinations down there in the Maida Peninsula as well as the Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, I should say, and in Nepal we've got the two regions of Mustang and Dolpo. In the future, we've got some really ambitious targets also to expand the range to include places like New Zealand and Morocco, also Australia, Peru, some great horse riding to be had in Colombia and the US. So they're a little bit further down the track. So horse tricks, as I've sort of alluded to, what they're going to do is really connect you with people of the land in a way that few other journeys can. And these are not just rides, they're sort of a real window into the deeply rooted ways of life in these chosen destinations. They're guided by horse handlers who treat their animals like kin. And, whether it's the gauchos of Patagonia on the wide open steppe or the semi sort of nomadic herders of Mongolia's vast grasslands. And even as far as, in Nepal, there's a real culture also of horsemen in the Himalayan trails. What you're going to be really, I think, blown away by is the rhythm of life that's shaped sort of by that bond between humans and horse and the landscape. So the learnings you'll come away with about their lifestyles and the traditions will be really profound. What I'd like to do now is just hand over to my colleague Sarah to walk us through the next section. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Sue. So horse tracking does definitely bring immense rewards, but riding in remote regions means that we have to take safety and preparation really, really seriously. So this means we care not only for our travellers, but for the local teams, the people we encounter, and the animals that make these trips possible. Every single horse trek is led by a qualified local guide with extensive regional knowledge and experience in animal handling, and these professionals are able to ensure rider safety, manage the horses, and oversee group wellbeing on the trail. In some regions, like Mongolia and Kyrgyzstan, handlers are often, as Sue mentioned, from nomadic backgrounds, bringing generations of horse knowledge to your trip. On every horse trek, we bring detailed gear lists to help you to prepare. We take care to ensure that we have a clear understanding of our riders' experience to allow the local teams to match riders and horse, with times set out before hitting the trail to really get to know each other so you can ride safely. We'll hold daily briefings and gear checks, and quality tack is always provided. Also, helmets are typically provided, but when they're not available, this is clearly outlined in our pre-departure information, and we're here to help with some purchase recommendations to make sure you've got exactly the right gear for the trip. Support vehicles and pack animals will always carry the luggage, and our guides are fully trained in wilderness first aid and carry specific first aid kits to riding injuries, so they're able to really tailor the care that they give our riders. We'll always ride to the conditions, and if needed, we'll dismount depending on the terrain. And that way you're able to really nuance the situation to what's happening. And on several trips, you're able to walk different sections if you prefer. I think it's really key to understand that the welfare of animals are a vital part of these trips, and we only work with partners who meet international animal welfare standards based on the 5 domains model. And so in practical terms, what this means is that horses are given unrestricted access to clean water, appropriate feed and shelter, and load limits are really strictly enforced, which means that they carry no more than 20% of the horse's body weight. The saddles and tack are properly fitted and always checked really regularly, and horses are never overworked, mistreated, or handled using whips, spurs, or harsh bits. Naturally, the horses are allowed to roam, rest, and socialise naturally at the end of the day's ride, and we take care to make sure that they're well fed and really cared for in every environment. The next aspect, which is really important that I like to speak to, are our trip gradings. And obviously, every trip in the World Expeditions range is graded to ensure that our travellers can make the best decision regarding their suitability for a trip. Our range of horse treks are typically graded within 3 and 4 on our scale. The Nepal trip, which takes place at altitude, is graded moderate, which is at a 5 in our range. In brief, grade 3 treks are introductory and they're suitable for first-time riders who are physically active, and the riding days typically are between 4 to 6 hours with regular rest stops. The grade 4 trips are introductory to moderate, and they're designed for adventurous travellers with some riding stamina. Days might involve 6+ hours in the saddle, possibly over multiple days in a row and in more varied and more challenging terrain. I would say that it's really important for you to read the trip notes because that information will always give you a really clear snapshot of the expectations, and our team are 100% here to help you to choose the right trip for your interests and your ability. In terms of preparation, it's important, of course, to make sure that our horses are well equipped. And the horse riding tack that you can expect to be provided with on our trips are good quality, safe and well-fitted tack. Sometimes we're using, as Sue mentioned, traditional gear. So for example, in Patagonia, we might use the traditional Kangalis saddle. In Mongolia, we actually send over Australian stock saddles, and they're really comfortable for a long day's riding, and you can see a picture of one of those to the right of that image. Bridles are really dependent on the horses and the training methods that have been employed when they're being trained, but typically we'll use a gentle snaffle bit. In some cases, there'll be saddlebags and cruppers and surcingles, breastplates, etc., depending on the terrain and the horses. So there's some examples for you to see there. We'll send on a detailed gear list, but in general, you can expect to need to bring some jodhpurs, or if you don't have those, just a pair of pants without an inner seam to make it much more comfortable as you're riding and preventing any discomfort. Riding gloves and riding boots are really important, as well as some trekking shoes for the walking sections and light, quick drying layers. We'll absolutely provide you with a detailed gear list to help with that preparation. And as I mentioned, our staff are really here to help you prepare to make sure that you're 100% ready for your ride. Once you get out on the trail, orientation during the ride is really important. And before the ride begins and the horses have been assigned, you'll receive a really detailed briefing on how to mount and dismount, how to hold the reins, how to sit correctly, and what to do in different terrains. So, for example, if you're going down a hill, you'll need to lean back a little bit to make it more comfortable for the horse and more stable for you. So you'll be given some basic cues on how to stop, how to turn, and how to encourage the horse forward. Of course, on more challenging trips, it's important that you have a bit of experience, but in many trips, it's not necessarily, and you'll be given all the support that you need. During the trip, you'll have constant support. So local handlers will walk alongside or ride beside you, and your main guide will always be there to check for comfort, fatigue, or any issues with the saddle or gear. There are support vehicles where the terrain allows, and walking trails will often parallel the route. So you'll have the option potentially to walk if you prefer, and that's also a lovely way to connect with the animal. I'll hand back over to Sue now, who'd like to speak a bit more specifically about some of the treks that we have on offer.
Thanks, Sarah. I was just going to say, just on what Sarah was just speaking about, it's just such a wonderful bond that you do form with your animal. Like, even if you arrive and you get on the horse and it feels very alien and unusual, within even a few hours, you'll start to get to know the personality of that animal. So it's almost like you're on a trekking group with animals that you get to know their personality and nuances, and it is so lovely. It's a really beautiful aspect of horse trekking, and I think you'll absolutely, revel in that. But yes, I'm just going to move on now to the next part of the presentation, which is just an overview really of some of the programs that we have on offer this year and next year. We've already got dates up for 2027 as well, if you've already booked up your 2026 holiday. But Mustang is the first one I wanted to start with because this is a really special program that has been crafted by a lady called Margie Thomas. And it's into an area in Nepal in the Upper Mustang area. And it's such a unique experience. And really, it is really Margie who brings that to life. She's a lady who's sort of dedicated a lot of the last 10 years of her travel life to, really getting to know Mustang and the people and the communities. And on this trip that has been very carefully curated by her, it coincides with the Yartung Festival, which is a really colourful and spirited celebration that's held up in the Walls, very beautiful area of Mustang called Lomanthang, one of the main towns up in that region. And here you'll witness that Yartung Festival, which is a traditional horse racing, dancing, and there's all these kind of community rituals that really give an insight into the Tibetan culture. And that's not something that's staged for tourists, but it's really deeply, local and meaningful. So, I just think this is such a fantastic experience to be traveling with Margie. It means you won't be just visiting this region, but you'll be interpreting with someone who's really like sort of had a foot in both worlds for the last decade. And she really does open doors and make it so accessible. And that just adds so much context and sort of insight into every way of this beautiful region of Nepal. This trip is scheduled to depart this August, and it always sells out. There are only 2 places remaining. And if you are keen to go to Nepal but explore a really remote and beautiful area of the country, I would really suggest that you get your bookings in now. The next one that I wanted to talk about, also a absolutely scenic special area of Nepal, again really off the beaten track, is Dolpo. And this next horse trek I'm going to talk about is basically a 24-day trip, and it takes place in September of this year, so there's only one departure. What makes this trip really unique is that you're traveling on horseback alongside the experienced local horse handlers of the Dolpo region specifically. We'll be moving really slowly through the dramatic terrain, and that starts in sort of these really windswept alpine meadows and overpasses, and just sort of soaking in that beautiful landscape, and it ultimately culminating at a place called Foxomdu Lake, which is an impossibly blue high altitude lake with a beautiful monastery that's located there, and it's surrounded by sheer kind of rock walls and ancient forest, and the scenery is just surreal. It is absolutely beautiful. And it's such an ideal adventure for people who want sort of a really slower, immersive way to explore this corner of the country. So yeah, I'd really highly recommend also the Dolpo Foxomdu Lake horse trek. The other one that I'll be talking about, where I went last year, is Kyrgyzstan. And oh, what a destination. It is just so dramatic. And the people of this, it's almost like akin to the people of the steppe of Mongolia. Horses are everything in this country. It's, I mentioned in our opening, it's a way of life, it's a connection. They even drink the milk of the horse. And to travel in this country on horseback is such a joy. I did quite a bit of it while I was there, and I must say I really, really reveled in that experience. So what you'll do on this trip is sort of traverse remote trails that are really only accessible by horseback. You're far away from any of the roads or even the crowds that, no, there's not really crowds in Kyrgyzstan, let's face it, but the trekking trails are getting a little more popular, but surrounded by sort of towering peaks and these sort of ancient walnut forests. It's just dotted with yurts everywhere. So tradition is all around. But the real highlight of this trip is the connection with the people of the land, the Kyrgyz horse handlers. They're deeply respectful to their animals, and they treat them not as tools but as kin. So I think if you get up to Kyrgyzstan and enjoy this trip, you get something very unfiltered. And the trip departs on July 6th this year. So if you are looking for a trip departing in the middle of the year, I'm sure you'll find this trip to be an absolute winner. So I'd like to hand over now to Sarah, so she can speak on some of the other horse trek destinations on offer.
Thanks, Sue. Well, I guess importantly, Mongolia is such a key place to consider offering horse treks, and for us, it's really clear that Mongolia lends itself so perfectly to riding, and our horse treks offer a chance to experience Mongolia in the way that it's been travelled for centuries by horseback and alongside nomadic herders. It's not a staged experience, it's a living cultural exchange, and travellers are led by the true keepers of Mongolia's equestrian and cultural traditions, and they offer an unmatched insight into the landscape and the culture and life on the steppe. Nights are spent in traditional ger camps, and that adds a cultural richness to the journey where you'll live alongside the local people and really learn about their way of life. The Mongolian horses we select are done so for their calm and temperaments and adaptability, and they're perfectly suited to this terrain. We have a number of trips in Mongolia. We have a popular locally led trip called Central Mongolia Horse Trek, and that takes place in the Khan-Kenti mountain range. And we also have 2 trips that are led by the explorer Tim Cope, where there's an option to pre-arrange the use of horses for some sections of the trip. Now, Tim is a National Geographic Adventure honoree and an award-winning author whose deep knowledge of Mongolian culture and history really does add a profound insight for our travellers. And thanks to Tim's deep connections, the trips really offer opportunities that aren't accessible to people who don't have those friendships out on the steppe. He'll share a really historical context as well as personal stories from his 10,000-kilometre horseback journey across Eurasia and the insights into the challenges faced by nomadic cultures today. And this will really enrich every single step of your journey. Tim's definitely the ultimate horseman, and we're really privileged to have him leading our trips in Mongolia. I'd just like to mention too, in respect of this image, you can see some more examples of the types of saddles that we're using in Mongolia. Those are Australian stock saddles on the image on the right there, so you can see they're really comfortable and you'll be well equipped there. The other thing around Mongolia is that Tim and our team are really always happy to talk to our travellers to help prepare or to decide if this horse trek is right for them. So do reach out and we'd be very happy to connect you if you had really specific questions around that. The other trip that I'd like to jump to now is somewhere that Sue mentioned before in respect of Tierra del Fuego. And this 12-day trip really is a ride to the end of the world, and it explores Patagonia's very wildest frontier. It traverses ancient Lenga forests, glacier-fed rivers, and windswept valleys to the very, very tip of South America. The trip promises an experience that will really tap into the Tierra del Fuego's living heritage, which is still defined by the horses and the weather and self-reliance. So your expert guides aren't there to not only to ensure your safety, but they will also immerse you in a rich living culture, from campfire cooking to the care of the horses that they love so much. This is a trip for confident riders with a really strong spirit of adventure, and will ride into pristine protected reserves, accessed primarily only by foot or horseback. And it really is an expedition. It will trace the Maita Peninsula, and it culminates in a visit to the southernmost point in Argentina. There's an iconic lighthouse there, which has been a beacon of hope and guidance for sailors navigating the treacherous waters of the southern Atlantic Ocean for generations. Nights are spent in scenic wild camps with hearty meals and a deep connection to nature. There are no screens, no roads, just the stars and stories to be told. It's a really magic trip, and I would highly recommend it. The Patagonia season is really short, so do have a look at the website for dates, but typically there are departures from around about September to sort of March and April. So the other trip that we have down in Patagonia offers you a chance to ride in the shadow of the Andes through remote Patagonian valleys, again flanked by dramatic granite spires and glacial lakes and snow-capped peaks. It really is a magnificent wilderness down there, and you'll experience the authentic gaucho culture, again riding alongside locals whose deep knowledge of the land and whose horse handling skills will really give you an immersive insight into the rural life of people down in Patagonia. The route will definitely avoid commercialised areas, so we'll cross into private estancias and untouched valleys, again accessible only on horseback for a really raw, off-the-grid experience. The horses here will carry the food, and you'll camp in remote locations. Again, there's lots of campfire meals and stargazing, and you'll ride across rivers and through open plains and quiet valleys, and you'll see turquoise lakes. It really is a spectacular wilderness down here. The landscape feels really expansive, and sometimes you might even get to see some wild horses as they gallop along the grasslands. And I think that seeing the heart of Torres del Paine from horseback really is an experience that isn't to be missed. And of course, the food in this part of the world is really important. And you have lots of lovely cheese platters and Patagonian barbecues to help fuel you as you ride along. So the food is definitely a highlight in this particular area and on many of our treks. I would say that horse riding is without a doubt one of the very best ways to experience a landscape. It's unobtrusive, it's in touch with nature, and it really allows you to experience the elements. You'll form a wonderful connection with your horse as the trip unfolds, and you'll bring home lifelong memories of that connection with the horses and the people and the places that you see. We would so love to see you on the trail and to share everything that horse riding in the wilderness has to offer. We have some fantastic trips, and our staff are 100% here to help you to navigate them and to find the best possible riding experience.
Thanks, Sarah. I just wanted to echo all of those sentiments. And you know, I've got to say, I mean, this has been a passion project for the last 18 months. We've been beavering away on getting this lineup together, you know, just because we know how much people have really enjoyed the elements of horse riding. And just to echo what I said right at the very beginning, it has really hit the spot. We just know how much value people get from this type of travel experience. So we're really excited to present this all to you tonight. I hope you like the lineup that we've come up with so far, and there will be plenty more that we'll be rolling out in the future months and years ahead. So just to bring the presentation to a close tonight, I just wanted to ask is if there's any questions that people would like to put forward, and Sarah and I would be more than happy to answer them for you this evening.
Sue, just Brad here from behind the scenes. Everyone on your Zoom, you might see a Q&A button there. And if you click on that, you'll be able to type in your question. So we'll just give you a minute to find that.
Brad, I can see one question here that's like, is it true that really you don't need any horse riding experience at all to participate in these trips? So I'm happy to answer that. Actually, I had a very dear friend of mine and her husband who wanted to go and have a very different travel experience with their kids. And I suggested to her, what about a horse trek? And she said, she was quite, you know, surprised, but she said, where? And she decided, I said to her, I think you should go to Mongolia. She went up to Mongolia. The four of them had the most incredible experience. So, you know, what this was such a great family sort of experience as well. So it is open for all different age groups. None of them had ever ridden horses before, other than the kids being taken around a little theme park on a horseback, but they got so much out of that experience. And it does really sort of highlight that it's something that you really can immerse in wholeheartedly.
100%. And I think too, Sue, to that point as well, what's really important is the grading system and having a look at what happens. But in terms of the challenge that may or may not be included in a trek, but certainly in places like Mongolia, there's such a horse culture, and you're able to get on and off and, you know, ride as much or as little as you'd like to. So there's a huge amount of support. And these are people who, as Sue mentioned, are born in the saddle. So they really, really understand how to ride and how to share their knowledge with people that come to Mongolia.
All right, some questions are coming through, guys. I'll read them out. First one, I'm 60. So Jackie has asked, I'm 60 and a capable rider. The Patagonia trip looks great. Suitable, do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think there are definitely longer days on the Patagonian trip. So you can expect to be in the saddle for more like six, as I mentioned before, you know, some are 6 to 7 hours. There are longer distances on that trip as well, so that you might be riding up to 50 kilometers a day. You'll notice on the images that I sent before, the horses are really solid and sure-footed and comfortable. They've got lovely long gaits and really perfect for that kind of terrain. So yes, if you're a horse person and you've ridden and you're a capable rider, that is absolutely the perfect trek. It's really a great way to see Patagonia.
Awesome. An anonymous attendee has asked, how do you assess riders for the different level of trips you offer?
Sure. So we have, when you make a booking with us, there are a set of questions that will pop up on the online booking, or if you're talking to our team, they'll ask you specifically a little bit more about your experience, and that information will help us to make sure it's the right trip for you. If it's a really entry level trip, as Sue mentioned, you don't necessarily need any experience. If it's a more challenging trip, we will ask more specific questions to make sure that you're well suited. And as any horse rider would know, horses have personalities, and some are bomb proof and some can be a little bit more flighty. And so that experience and that information from you will really help us and our guides to make sure you're on the right horse, because you can be riding exactly the same trail as somebody else, and the horse that you ride is, a little bit more goey, and you might find them a little bit more challenging. So that experience is really, really key. But we would encourage you to chat to us as well and ask. We're here to help.
And another question on a similar vein, which horse trip is best for beginners, please?
I would say, well, personally, I think Mongolia is perfect. I think that central
Absolutely.
Mongolian trek is fantastic for beginners. The other trek that I would suggest there would be Tim Cope's trips. And the reason for that is that they're not only purely horse riding treks, they're also walking trips as well. And there's a bit of camel riding and bits and pieces in there. So on those ones, you're able to arrange the hire of a horse and just have them for a shorter period of time. And obviously, Tim is a consummate professional who's really there to help. And
All
yeah, thanks.
Adding to that, Sarah, I would say Kyrgyzstan would also be a good starting trip. I mean, there's the openness of the plains, similar to Mongolia, mean that it's not too steep. Where it is too steep, you'd get off a horse anyway, and we will do that as a safety precaution. But I think that is an awesome destination for a first timer as well.
So Virginia's asked, on the Dolpo trek, do you ride the ponies both uphill and downhill, or only uphill and only on certain sections of uphill? Are some sections too steep for ponies?
They are. So the horse handlers, wranglers that are with you will have a really deep knowledge of the terrain, and they will know when you will need to dismount the horse and walk for a wee bit, and then mount the horse again when it's safe to do so. So it does come with some steeper terrain, but it's obviously the acumen of the local wrangler and our local guide together working to give you that advice. And that's where
So,
Sarah sort of elaborated on earlier.
so here's a question for you. I have read there are not many fruit and vegetable options when traveling generally in Mongolia and Kyrgyzstan. Are these an option on your trips?
I've never I've seen lots of vegetables in Kyrgyzstan. I can't say for Mongolia because I haven't traveled there personally, but certainly there's lots of fruit and vegetables in Kyrgyzstan. So I would say that's a myth.
And Jackie has asked, is there a single supplement on any of the horse treks, any gear supplied, e.g. chaps, dries a bone style raincoats?
Yeah, sure. I can speak to that one. So, um, generally, it does depend a little bit on the trip. So, in some sections, depending on the accommodation, obviously, our key focus for World Expeditions is always to minimise the cost for our travellers. And typically, there aren't any single supplements that are payable, and we'll always try and match people of the same gender where we can. And if that's not possible, then we'll cover the cost of that single typically for our travellers. Of course, if you prefer a single room, then that's something we can do for you. But bear in mind on these trips, as we've mentioned, there are some instances where you'll be in GERs and places where there's more communal kind of sleeping arrangements, but the trip notes will be really clear in respect of that. In terms of gear, chaps, I mean, typically we don't necessarily include them, and dry as a bone as a rider, I think, is such a key thing to have, particularly in Patagonia. I'd recommend a dry as a bone. The weather down there can be really difficult. But if you don't have that gear, it's not vitally important that you have it. You can ride in a raincoat. It's not too noisy when you move your arms. So we can help with that information and help you with the gear prep.
Cool. Just a little comment here from Jackie. She recently traveled in Mongolia and Kyrgyzstan. There was lots of vegetables and some fruit, especially melons. And Virginia has a little question. I've been told that they can't be ridden downhill. This was true for her and a friend when using ponies in the Andes. Is this correct?
It's very dependent on the terrain, 100%. So I think that it's difficult to have a blanket comment on that. And I would say, as to Sue's point before, it's really important that our handlers are the people that really understand the terrain and the capacity of their horses. So you don't have to get off a horse to ride it downhill. That's not a blanket thing. But again, it really depends on the terrain. If you're going through, something really steep and rocky, then it's more comfortable and safer for the horse for you not to be on their back.
That's all the questions, Sarah and Sue. And obviously, if there's more, they can always email us later. But thank you to you two for such a wonderful presentation.
Pleasure. It was enjoyable. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Good evening.